What was the water of purification for those who came in contact with the dead? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Numbers chapter 19. We're going to be reading from verses 17 to 22. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Numbers chapter 19, beginning of verse 17. And for an unclean person, they shall take some of the ashes of the heifer, burnt for purification from sin, and running water shall be put on them in a vessel. A clean person shall take hyssop, and dip it in the water, sprinkle it on the tent, on all the vessels, on the persons who were there, and on the one who touched a bone, the slain, the dead, or a grave. The clean person shall sprinkle the unclean on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And on the 7th day he shall purify himself, wash his clothes, and bathe in water, and at evening he shall be clean. But the man who is unclean and does not purify himself, that person shall be cut off from among the assembly, because he has defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. The water of purification has not been sprinkled on him. He is unclean. It shall be a perpetual statute for them. He who sprinkles the water of purification shall wash his clothes, and he who touches the water of purification shall be unclean until evening. Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the person who touches it shall be unclean until evening. In this lesson, we'll conclude our look at the purification process that one had to undertake if they came in contact with a dead body. Before this process could take place, the priest had to offer a red heifer whose ashes would be used. This didn't have to be done every time, but would have needed to be done when the ashes ran out. The instructions for this sacrifice were given in verses 1 to 10 of this chapter 2 lessons ago in this series. In our last lesson, we found that in order to be purified, you had to wash with the water of purification on the 3rd and 7th day of your uncleanness. If you did not do so, you would remain unclean, defile the tabernacle of the Lord, and be cut off from among the people. Why did coming in contact with the dead make one unclean? Well, first of all, physical decay made one physically unclean, and unless God had instituted something that would purify that, no matter how much you washed, you would be ceremonially unclean in his sight. But the second reason had to do with sin. Death is the consequence of the first sin and is a reminder of our sinfulness. Someone associated with sin couldn't approach God unless they were purified. So having now looked at the offering of the heifer and the when and why someone needed to be purified, now let's look at the process itself. When a person came in contact with the dead, they were immediately unclean. They could not go get the ashes for the water of purification itself. Someone who was clean had to do so. The ashes, of course, were from the red heifer. Only a small portion of the ashes needed to be collected in a vessel, so these ashes could last for a while before a new heifer needed offered. Running water, that is new water, was to be poured over the ashes, which made the water itself holy, as the ashes were offered in sacrifice to God for this purpose. On the 3rd day and the 7th day, the process was the same. The clean person who was chosen for this ritual would dip hyssop in the water, hyssop being symbolic here for its purifying power, and then that was sprinkled on the tent where the dead body was found, all of the vessels that were unclean, and on any persons who were there that were unclean. After the 7th day, once they were sprinkled with the holy water, the unclean person was to wash his clothes, bathe in water, and at evening they would be clean. This last part was similar to other instances that we've read about in our studies concerning other forms of uncleanliness. If this is not done, again, the person is unclean and they would be cut off from the assembly. The clean person, even though he is clean when they started the process, because they touched the water of purification, they too are now unclean, but not because of the dead. All they had to do was wash their clothes, presumably bathe in water, and they would be clean at evening. This is said to be a perpetual statute for them, meaning that this wasn't just a statute for Israel just while they were in the wilderness, but after they dwelt in Canaan too. As long as the law of Moses was enforced, this was to be kept. Today we're not under the law of Moses, hence we do not have to keep this statute. With the conclusion of chapter 19, we come to the end of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness that began at the end of chapter 14. As for the history that took place here, except for a few notable events, much of Israel's history isn't recorded for us. Whether this is because not many things were notable that happened at this time, or whether it was because God didn't want Israel to remember much from this time period, I don't know. But the Lord willing, in our next lesson, we find the next generation of the children of Israel back in Kadesh, preparing to travel to Canaan, though we won't see them actually take the promised land until the book of Joshua. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers chapter 20, verses 1 to 13, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.